is that you or me?
That's me if I can find my mute button. All right.
And just Adriana, just to let you know, at some point I'll have to switch to my phone, but I will call in beforehand. So if you see that pop up, I'm not going anywhere. I'll still be on for quorum, just switching from spaces.
Love it. Thank you for the heads up. All right. Kevin Bond. Eric Brownfield.
Here.
Tyler Denham.
Sorry, present.
Any heart attack there? Kevin Doby. Karen Flores.
Here.
Sandy Flores.
Here.
Jackie Kellogg.
Here.
Devon is absent. Moses Milazzo is absent. Corey Runge. Corey, I didn't see Corey. Glenn Slivers. And Haley Zoroya.
Here. And you skipped Ross.
I guess you
Ross
don't need
Schaefer.
quorum.
Ross Schaefer.
Yes, I'm here.
How did I skip you, Ross? Okay.
Thank you very much. Do I have a commissioner that would volunteer to read the land acknowledgement for us this month? Anyone? Okay, I'll do it.
I'll do it.
Oh, thank you. Whoever said yes, please join.
It's Jackie.
Thanks, Jackie.
The Housing Commission humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by Native descendants, border mountains sacred to indigenous people. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place as home.
Great. Thank you, Jackie or Commissioner Kellogg. At this time, it's public comment. So at this time, any member of the public may address the commission on any subject within their jurisdiction that is not scheduled before the commission on that day. Due to open meeting laws, the commission cannot discuss or act on items presented during this portion of the agenda. To address the commission on an item that is on the agenda, please wait for the chair to call for public comment at the time the item is heard. Adriana, do we have anyone that would like to speak?
I have not received any emails, but if any members of the public would like to speak, now is the time.
Okay, seeing none, we will move on to approval of the minutes. So this is the consideration and approval of minutes from the Housing Commission meeting, May 22nd, 2025. I will entertain a motion if there are not concerns or questions.
I'll make a motion.
Commissioner Denham, I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Schaefer and Commissioner Denham. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining? Okay, great. That motion passes. Next up is action items, of which we have none. So next up is the presentation and discussion items. First up is the bond-funded homebuyer assistance program update. Adriana.
Thank you, Sandy. Hello, commissioners. I'm Adriana Fisher, as you know, Housing Program Manager for the Housing Office. I don't have a formal presentation today, but I would like to take the opportunity to provide you with a brief update on what we are calling CHAP B, which is the City of Flagstaff's extended bond-funded homebuyer assistance program. The bond funds are available, but the city is currently finalizing a contract with Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona. I think I gave you an update last month that they were the successful proposer to the RSOQ to administer the program. We anticipate that the funds will be accessible to the public in the next couple of weeks. So this is phase 1 of the program. It's designed to help mortgage-ready home buyers who are financially eligible but need assistance with upfront costs. Each household, just as a reminder, this item came to you last year where you provided your input and feedback. This will increase the current program to $50,000 in loan funds that are never forgiven with a 10-to-1 match. So this means that $5,000 from the home buyer will unlock the full amount of assistance for $50,000. These loans, again, are never forgiven, and the home buyer will have to occupy the home as their primary residence. The application that is currently being used by Housing Solutions is going to be the same application for the bond program as well. So if you have any clients or know of anybody that would like to apply for the program, it's available. But maybe I would just give Housing Solutions a couple of weeks so we don't bombard them before a contract is ready to go. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions about this topic, and we can open it up for public comment if necessary.
Adriana, can I add, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Housing Commission. Please forgive my camera being off. I'm in Michigan at a lake house and look a little informal today. So the other piece is that this program is being implemented in phases. Did you cover this and I missed it?
I covered that this is phase 1, but I forgot to talk about phase 2.
All right. Phase 2 is the permanent affordability piece where there was more stickiness surrounding it. This will let us get the funds for CHAP moving sooner. We know the demand is there. We know that people are waiting. This lets us move funds within the next couple of weeks. We will be back to you with the details surrounding the permanent affordability piece. Because that could have slowed this down, we separated the implementation of the two. The other piece, of course, is the pilot piece we will be trying out. So there was input and feedback on that piece specifically that we do need to finish up, but we want to get this money moving now. So this model lets us do that, gets the money on the street faster. We will come back to you to finish the discussion regarding the permanent affordability.
Thank you, Sarah.
Any questions or any public comment on this topic? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. Our next item is a presentation from the Flagstaff Fire Department's Wildland Fire Management Program. We would like to welcome Mr. Neil Chapman, Wildland Fire Captain. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. Give me a second. I'm just going to share my screen here. Share. PowerPoint. Housing Commission. All right. Do we see a nice, pretty picture of a forest with a prescribed fire?
Yes.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you.
do.
Okay, my name is Neil Chapman. I'm a Wildland Fire Captain with the City of Flagstaff Fire Department. I've been with the city almost 6 years, but I've been in Flagstaff since 2006. Worked for the Nature Conservancy here for many years before that. And we've got a really exciting program that we'd love to chat with you guys about today and certainly have time for questions afterwards. We're going to talk a little bit about fire behavior, where we see some fire risk emerging around our community, some of the best available science around what to do, what we are doing, and then some state, some federal, state, and local action that's kind of going on around this spot. So this is our forest. On top there is an area near Walker Lake. A bunch of you have probably seen me use this slide before. Top photo is about 1880 something, and the bottom photo is 1980 something, and So that's the change we've seen over 100 years of our forest. And the main driver of that change was what we call fire suppression and fire exclusion. So the suppression part is the putting out of natural ignition. So when lightning would start a natural wildfire, they were put out for about 100 years. But also a really important part to remember is the exclusion of cultural burning. So the indigenous peoples in our area used fire as a tool to do all the things that we, think about fire as beneficial to our community. They were doing that as well, whether it was keeping the forest open to reduce wildfire risk, whether it was improving forage for game animals, whether it was improving, berry populations. There's just all this evidence for thousands of years. People have been using fire to better their communities. And so the exclusion of that practice as well had a big change on our forested environment. So this is a great example. This is the Ponderosa Pine Forest. These photos were taken at the exact same place over 100 years. So photo on the bottom, 1909, 1948, you can see what we call the structure is changing. So the vertical structure of those trees, we now have a lot more fuel that is taking fire that should stay on the ground and up vertically into the canopy. And then there we are. Let me move my little thing. It's blocking my date, 1989. So, about 100 years apart there. And that's problematic. The photo on the bottom left, when it burns, it's going to look like that. And we love those fires. Those are good fires. They're stimulating nutrient cycling. They're burning up the small regenerating trees, so we only have the right density. They're recycling pine needles. And that fire right there, if it's undesirable, we can put that out with tools and water really easily. So our local response model is really well equipped to deal with that fire, whether we're lighting it or fighting it. On the top right, that fire is going to look like this, and we're not well equipped to deal with that. Odds are, if it's fire that's looking like that, it's probably a windy day and aerial resources are going to be limited. And sometimes I joke that, that fire on the right there, on the bottom right, we're probably going to be in a parking lot taking pictures. And so that's not the kind of fire we want around our community. We can't engage in that space. It's just too dangerous. And how do we know how frequently these forests used to burn? It's really well studied, especially in the Arizona Ponderosa Pine Forest. This tree cookie is from just north of the Cheshire gas station in the Chimney Springs area. And the fire, when it burns through a forest, it'll leave a little mark on a tree ring. So we can go back and count those. And then when you collect those tree ring samples over hundreds, if not thousands of locations, you get a really confident amount of fire that we can say occurred on that landscape. So what we're looking at here is from 1540 to 1876, just north of Flagstaff, 336 years, we saw 68 fires. So on average, about 4.9 years that entire spot was burning. So we know really frequent. And if there was any doubt about the fire behavior, there's no way it could be that frequent and be high severity, because those trees wouldn't be there to burn again a few years later. They would have burned up. So that's how we know they were low severity fires, and the adult and mature trees were fully surviving those fires. So now that we got fire ecology out of the way in the forest, what we call the natural environment, we'd like to talk about the built environment. And so that's where we have our municipal infrastructure, our homes. And so in this photo here, this is the Observatory Mesa Natural Area on the left. So that's a science-based ecological thinning, and we've got some prescribed fire we've done in that area as well on the left. So that's what a forest structure and pattern looks like, where the fire stays on the ground. And then look how dense it is on the right, where we have all the homes. So this is an area we've targeted for thinning. We've been able to make some great progress, but this is pretty representative of the challenge that we're seeing, where we've had 30 years of really aggressive work in the natural environment around Flagstaff, and not quite as aggressive or targeted work in the built environment. Here's another one just up Highway 180 as well. I don't mean to pick on the 180 corridor. I live up the 180 corridor, but it's there's the Cheshire gas station right there on the bottom. Forest Service land, again, ecological thinning has taken place, and then look at the tree density in the neighborhood right there. So the uncontrollable wildfire risk really isn't in the forest surrounding our community. It's inside the community itself in a few of these cases. Okay, so what's the best available science and how we deal with this? Well, we've got our Flagstaff city codes. We've got our building codes, our wildland urban interface codes, resource protection standards, landscaping codes. We've got the home ignition zone, home and business hardening science. That's really taking place these days in an aggressive way with groups like the National Fire Protection Association. They have their Firewise USA program, Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and then a couple slides I'll get into as well, natural and built environment fire pathways and structure fire spread and vulnerability models. These are all new things that just in the last couple of years we've been looking into on ways to better prepare the built environment in our community. And then I was very fortunate in 2022, I was appointed to the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission, and we published a report in 2023 that I really think was a game changer, where we look at the challenges of wildfire risk in both the natural and the built environment in a way that I really had not seen done at that scale before. Usually you'll find reports about structure fire spread or forest fire spread, but rarely are they combined together in one report. And that's what we've really got here in that September 2023 report. So that's kind of the science that's guiding our efforts. So the National Fire Protection Association, we've integrated this into our forest management plan for the city of Flagstaff. This is basically science-based tree spacing or vegetation spacing. Some of the emerging science is as little flammable material as possible within 5 feet of your structure. Within 5 to 30 feet, we want to see trees and clumps spaced about 18 feet apart. And then as you get further from the structure, obviously you have more variability in the density of your vegetation. This is challenging in some areas where we have pretty dense communities. It's tough to go into some place like University Heights, where the homes may only be 10 feet apart, and figure out how we could still have some vegetation there and still have a fuel-free 5. So we're working through some efforts to try to identify, can mature trees still exist in a 5-foot zone as long as we don't have a giant accumulation of juniper shrubs or pine needles below those pine trees. So vegetation is a big part of this, and we're working closely with community development around some of these codes and trying to figure out how the right way to do this is for our community. The Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety has just been amazing in this space the last couple of years. It's a nonprofit that has a history of designing homes that survive hurricanes, tornadoes, hail damage, really natural disaster sort of science-based building construction work. And they're in the fire space now. So they have a couple standards that we're really interested in. One is called the Wildfire Prepared Home. Another one is called the Wildfire Prepared Neighborhood. And so the Wildfire Prepared Home standards, there's a base and a plus. Wildfire Prepared Home base is really well aligned with our WUI code. And as we're going through the update to the Wildland Urban Interface Code, we're envisioning having some discussions around just basically making our WUI code fully aligned with Wildfire Prepared base. Wildfire Prepared Plus is a little more difficult to achieve because it does have some requirements in there that cost a little more money and may not be applicable everywhere, but in some areas it may be very useful. This standard is currently not approved in state policy to be allowed for homeowners to achieve in Arizona. We'll get into that in a little bit, but basically it's only in Oregon and California right now. But the way it works is a homeowner would reach out to IBHS, they'd request an inspection to see if they qualify, and then if they qualify, they can share that qualification with their insurance company. National Institute for Standards and Technology has some really cool research these days. Can you guys see the little graphic motion there? Is that showing up? Great. Okay, I see head nodding. Thank you. They're really looking at structured fire spread through things like fences, vegetation. Fences really can act like a wick in a urban environment fire. And so this example here is, even though that home has a gazebo that may be well spaced from their structure, and they have a non-combustible fence, that separation distance to the combustible neighbor's fence isn't that great. So that gazebo could potentially catch on fire. Let's say they've got a barbecue in there that has some sort of incident, catches the neighbor's fence on fire. That neighbor's fence carries the fire to their RV and then to their non-combustible deck and then into their residence. So really thinking about these connections in the built environment these days is a big deal, because it's not just one house, it's a system. It's a system of homes and fences and vegetation that is causing this fire spread. So this research is really important for us as we're looking at how do we reduce this fire spread across different parcels. So as we're thinking about fire spread, I really like this graphic. This is a company that we're working closely with on a couple efforts called Xyloplan. they really summarize this well. I think that we see three challenges. We see vegetation to vegetation fire spread, and we know we can mitigate that with ecological thinning to keep that fire on the ground. When that fire is on the ground, things like fire breaks and emergency response works really well. Vegetation to structure fire spread. Now that's a little different. That means we've got a ground fire in the forest or in a grassland area that's spreading the structures, and then structure to structure fire spread. So as we're thinking about these different pathways and these different spreads, what we really want to be thinking about is how do we disrupt that fire spread? And the methods to disrupt fire spread in each one of these situations is a little different. And so the homes on the perimeter of a community, we're really going to look at that mitigating the vegetation to vegetation spread and the vegetation to structure. And then as we move into the community, we're looking at mitigating the structure to structure fire spread. So really identifying the different needs for these different sites, even though they could all be very close together, is a big part of what we're looking at. And so we did get a little demonstration from Xyloplan on locally here, what they call their pathways. And so this was assuming a fire started southwest of Flagstaff. These red lines are saying this is where fire is very likely to spread the fastest across the landscape. So this is basically just fuel and topography. And then we give them a weather scenario and we pick the one that's basically the same as either the tunnel or the pipeline fire, basically a late spring, early summer, red flag day, super dry, super windy. And so now we're looking at having this information on where is it likely for a vegetation to vegetation fire to transition to a vegetation to structure fire, and where should we be looking at those areas of impact. Their pathways also extend into the community a little bit, and we've got some other data that we're working on. I'll show you in a second about that spread into the community as well. So this is really exciting. I wouldn't say this is information that we wouldn't have potentially been able to come up on our own if we worked together to figure this out. We kind of know a southwest wind is going to drive fire this way, but having some of the science-based modeling to really inform some of our gut checking is really important. And then having these images to think about this work and share with some of our partners has been just transformational for us as well. So this is the only area we have this model for, but we're working on some plans to get this for some other areas around Flagstaff. And just last week, this is all brand new. So I know for some of you on the call that have kind of seen me do this before, this is some brand new info. Xyloplan was working with some folks in Colorado, and this is really exciting, where on the left there is their fire spread from, a potential source of ignition in the natural environment, where then it blows into the community. What we're looking at now is potentially saying a new community is going to be built. How can we design that built environment with the intention up front of stopping that fire spread, so disrupting the fire spread. So not just saying we're going to go build homes and increase our exposure and increase our risk, but building homes in a way that mitigates our risk, and now looking at the neighborhood as a fire break versus a fire risk. So their model is showing building this new neighborhood to that green area with the blue dots in a certain way. They could reduce that wildfire loss to 81 structures instead of the 413. And then they took that even to another level, where instead of building it kind of in that east to west shape, they designed it and modeled it north to south and put in some control features. And their model is then showing that they can reduce structure loss significantly by adding some development, which is a whole new way, I think, for us to be thinking about it, especially as so much of the new development in Flagstaff, whether it's the J.W. Powell corridor, whether it's the Purple Sage area, these are kind of on the perimeter of our community. And we can be thinking about how we build these new areas, not just like I said, not just in a way to increase our risk, but do it smart in a way that actually reduces our risk. And then structure vulnerability itself. This is another big deal for us. At the parcel level, we have a partner out of Colorado State University that we're just starting to work with. He's got a structure vulnerability model based on something called graph theory. Every time I hear him explain it, I get more confused. I have no idea how it works. But his model is basically about 84% accurate in predicting the loss of a structure in the campfire that burned the town of Paradise. So on the top left there, the red burned, the blue survived. That's his model on the right. You can see the blue and the red line up quite well. So he already did a very brief demo of this for us for Coconino County, and we're looking at getting some funding together through a foundation grant to fund him to do parcel level informed modeling for the entire county. And that will then allow us to do some really cool things where it basically helps us avoid what we call random acts of mitigation. So random, rather than going to an entire neighborhood and, saying, everybody needs to do a certain amount of mitigation, which is true, but now we can go to 10 specific homes, potentially where we now see where that's vegetation to structure fire could occur. Then we go to those 10 homes and in his model say, if those homes are high risk, let's say we do the defensible space and the home hardening and we make them now low risk, rerun the model and see how that reduces the vulnerability to the rest of the neighborhood based on that wind event. So we can basically start to really optimize where we're investing and where we're just going after the work to do of the defensible space and home hardening. Okay, so our current efforts, like I said, we're working on updating the International Building Code, International WUI Code, resource protection standards, working closely with the community development folks. I think we have a really cool program coming together on how we can help optimize tree retention for new development, and then figuring out some of these landscaping challenges as well. We don't want to be encouraging developers to do certain things up front, and then a year later we go and do a wildfire risk assessment for that homeowner. We tell them to remove all these junipers that the developer was forced to plant. So we're making sure we're getting all of these codes in alignment. We are using a really cool new software package. So everybody on the call, remember that we offer free wildfire risk assessments to homeowners in Flagstaff. So make sure if people are interested, they reach out to the fire department. We're using this software called WUI. They get a report. It's based on that IBHS wildfire prepared home template. It's super great. We're able to now track all of the work we're doing digitally. And then the Arizona Department of Insurance and Financial Institutions has a new effort I'll get into a second, as long as the Western Fire Chiefs. And we continue to focus on these collaborative efforts. There's very little here we can do by ourselves. And so working at local, state, and national levels is very important. And then, of course, our ongoing natural environment investments like the Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project are still going. So policy action at the national level, we really need to see an unprecedented investment in the built environment. And so the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission recommendations, the very first one we had in there was something called the Fire Environment Center. And that center really was focused on shared investments across both the natural and the built environment versus what we see at the federal level now, which is mostly the natural environment. We see, tens of millions of dollars coming in through FORFRI, the Forest Restoration Initiative. The state, we're getting money from the state to do hazardous fuel reductions. City of Flagstaff, the voters approved, 74% of voters approved a $10 million bond to go do ecological restoration in the forest. We've had no such horsepower to go into the neighborhood and do things in the neighborhood. And we're starting to build some momentum around that, but reforming federal grants. I mean, you may have heard of BRIC grants, BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. It was a FEMA program that got swept up recently in a lot of federal government issues. And so that whole program is just gone. But also empowering the U.S. Fire Administration. They're housed under FEMA, so there's some uncertainty there, to really help fire departments and fire districts at the local level take greater initiative in this space as well. So that report really is transformational. Like I said, how it's giving guidance to both natural and built environment work. And we're seeing some traction there. The Fix Our Forest Act, or FOFA, actually includes about half of the Wildfire Commission report recommendations. The challenge is it kind of creates these expectations, but it doesn't provide funding. So it's great to talk about this stuff. There's very little we can do without some sort of funding that comes with it. And then supporting beneficial wildfire across federal lands. That's really been our biggest tool in our toolbox within the Forest Restoration Initiative footprint. So within the Kaibab, the Coconino, the Apache Sickreeds, and Tonto National Forest, the number one accomplishment of all acres when we look at prescribed fire, ecological thinning, and wildfire that achieves a desired condition, the number one accomplishment really is that beneficial wildfire. And so making sure that that stays in our toolbox is part of our national policy action as well. And then at the state level, Paul Otrogi is heading up through Flagstaff Fire Department our relationship with the Western Fire Chiefs Association, what they're calling the Multi-State WUI Mitigation Alignment Project. So Western Fire Chiefs and Arizona Fire Chiefs are coordinating this with some key stakeholders. And really think of it this way, we need agreed upon mitigations that matter. So when we go to a homeowner and we give them recommendations on things they need to do to reduce their wildfire risk, We know we're giving them science-based, proven recommendations, but there's no policy at the state level that recognizes that's exactly the right thing to be doing. And not only do we need that action at the state level in Arizona, we need that to happen across many Western states. And so the Western Fire Chiefs Association is taking point on making sure that mitigations that matter and some other policy action isn't just happening at the individual state level, but they're coordinating with, I think, 7 Western states. And then the Arizona Department of Insurance and Financial Institutions got in the game a little while ago. It's very exciting. They have their Resiliency and Mitigation Council, and it's tasked with investigating the affordability and availability of homeowners insurance in forested areas and wildland urban interface areas. That's the QR code to their website. They're holding monthly meetings. I think they're about 5 or 6 months into their 1-year term. And their intent is to provide a report of findings to the governor's office and the legislature. Should be done hopefully next summer or next fall sometime. Or no, actually, let's see. We're halfway through, so hopefully winter, we should be expecting something. And that's really what we're going to need to see is the alignment of what we know that we're telling homeowners to do with policy action, because right now there's that disconnect between policy and science. So at the local level, we're working on updating our community wildfire protection plan. We're looking at updating these codes. For an example of some innovative things that we're thinking about, smoke mitigation. So how are we building new homes to be more adapted to smoke impacts, whether it's prescribed fire or beneficial wildfire or undesirable wildfire or pile burns? You know, we have smoke in our community, whether it's on our terms or not on our terms, it's happening. And HEPA-rated filters are really effective at reducing indoor air quality impacts. The challenge is if you have a 1-inch thick filter for your HVAC system, it's not going to do very well with a HEPA-rated filter because it really bogs down your blower. But if you have a 3 or 4-inch thick filter, you can get really high quality rated filters. Now that's going to cost a little bit more, but those filters last a lot longer. So we're looking at some cost and trade-offs around costs of saying maybe all of our new construction should be built with 4-inch thick filter setups instead of 1-inch thick to make sure that people can use HEPA-rated filters. Local action as well, trying to scale up our beneficial fire programs and smoke mitigation investments. So donating HEPA filters, the standalone plug-in filters, better monitoring of our smoke impacts. We're looking at opportunities to kind of test what we're calling this alternative risk transfer approaches. So basically testing how many homes can we get qualified for that IBHS program before it's even qualifying in Arizona as an official program. At that parcel level, we're really working with those homeowners to be proactive in getting that information out. And we're working closely with Coconino County. They're updating a CWPP and they're exploring a lot of ways that they can be looking at updating some of their building codes as well. So really, you can think of our program, these 3 pillars of everything we do within our wildland fire management program. We're looking at resilient landscapes, fire-adapted communities, and safe and effective response. And when we can really tie these 3 things together, I think we're effectively reducing wildfire risk, not just to our forests, but to our neighborhoods as well. So that's my presentation. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Haley. I see your comment in the chat.
Tyler.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, Neil. I've been thinking through a lot of these issues with regards to the code analysis project that's going on, and I'm having trouble synthesizing a lot of my thoughts on urban trees and fire risk, and I'm really curious to pick your brain. On one hand, I know that urban trees, or I read that they're really important for pleasant communities. You know, they protect and cool down the area and they make them much more pleasant for walking, biking, and just generally existing outside. For example, compare the experience of walking down 4th Street versus Townsite, which has a very dense forest canopy, though the vast majority of trees there are non-native, mature non-natives. On the other hand, you know, I've heard a lot that the tree density in communities like University Heights, which are predominantly native ponderosa pines, make those communities really at risk of fire events. And I'm curious, do those communities have a similar level of fire risk, or is there some kind of categorical difference between, say, University Heights and Townsite that leads to different levels of fire risk? Is it like the type of trees, their location on private property versus the public right of way, or their proximity to the wildland urban interface?
Yeah, Tyler, that's a great question, and I'll be honest. My two thoughts are: number one, we struggle with it too. Number two, it depends. And so that's why we really try to encourage everybody to get us out there to stand in your driveway, because when we're talking about wildfire risk to a home, we really can't perfectly model everything. At some point, we just need to be standing in your driveway talking about this with a homeowner. We know we can have trees in a community where and reduce wildfire risk. It's spooky. Some of those pictures from Los Angeles where you have an entire street of the homes are gone, the trees are fine. So it's not just trees carrying the fire, it's a combination of things. So it's is that tree touching a house? Is that tree touching a fence? Is that tree touching another tree that's touching another tree? And so really what we are focusing on these days is that pathway, and where is that disruption point going to take place? The good thing is most mature trees, like especially in University Heights, it's not just trees. They got some big, beautiful trees in there. Big mature ponderosa pine trees are pretty darn fire resistant. So even if fire runs up that bark, that tree is going to be fine, and it's probably not going to send a lot of embers screaming all over town. So I think what we like to think about is there a lot of fuel under that pine tree. So if you've got a foot of pine needles, if you've got a 40-year-old juniper shrub, if you've got your wood pile, if you've got some type of combining force under that tree that will then create that kind of heat level that may cause the crown of that fire to catch on fire, or the crown of that tree to catch on fire, that's something that we're looking at. So it's really a combination of things. And I think we'll be okay with tree densities if we get that disruption factor built into our models and we start looking at some of these things. So we're not saying, we want to go clear cut everything. We've just got to look at that combination of fuel around a parcel. I worry a lot more about pine needles and fences than I do about mature trees when we're in a neighborhood.
Gotcha.
Does that help a
there's
little bit?
Yeah, so the takeaway I'm getting there is there likely is a way to have a healthy amount of urban trees for those community benefits that don't necessarily increase fire risk. It just requires nuisance in how it's done.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why we're looking forward to some of this modeling, because, there may be parcels where it is really important to reduce their wildfire risk more than other parcels. And so those pathways are potentially going to show us where we know in some of these areas where that vegetation fire transitions to a structure fire. If that area is, the home hardening and the defensible space is kind of perfected in that spot, I mean, that location could be hosting structure fire spread to a lot of other structures. So it's not that every parcel is equal in that sense. On a windy day, we know we're with some of these models now where we really need to think a lot more about, this parcel potentially holds that structure fire spread more than other parcels. And so what we're really looking at is, I think, optimizing these things. We've gone to a bunch of homes and helped people with some grant funds cut some trees, and they're really nervous at first, and they say, "Oh, I don't want to cut too many trees." And we're like, "No, don't worry. I think we could cut half these trees out, and you'll basically still have very similar shading and crown density. You'll just have a whole lot less pine needles and fewer stems out there." And then we have healthier trees too, because if we have too many trees stacked on one spot, then those trees are going to be stressed and never be super healthy, especially as we look at potential impacts of drought or warming and variable precipitation patterns. And then another point too that we're working closely with community development on. And man, I forget if it was Tiffany or Alex or whoever came up with this, the concept of neighbor woods. And so if there's a parcel in the community or a corner where there's a couple homes or a park where we can stack a few more trees and create a little more of a darker forest in that spot that doesn't impact fire risk to the built environment around it, then we're all for it. And that's where this resource protection standards, I think, is going to come in with this LIDAR imagery where we can basically pick and choose tree retention for a parcel and really be able to verify each individual tree's location and contribution to risk. So it's it's a long answer, and I feel bad, but it depends. we gotta stand in the driveway and talk to that homeowner to really figure it out together.
Yeah, no, I appreciate picking your brain on it. A follow-up question to that: do you think there's a big difference in terms of fire risk to trees that are on private property versus the public right-of-way? Such as, do you think trees in public right-of-way should be treated for- sorry, what was someone saying?
Well, I'm not sure. Go ahead, Tyler.
Oh yeah, someone was talking at the same time.
Yep.
Yeah, as in, do you think trees in the public right of way are inherently safer because the city maintains control over them? Like,
I hate to give it again, but it kind of depends. I'd have to stand there and look at it. The city may be pruning and, maintaining those trees, but if the city's not dealing with those pine needles, then I might be a little more worried where, if a homeowner's or an HOA itself is dealing with pine needles, I might be less worried. So it's, those, like I said, those trees can be pretty fire resistant if they don't have a bunch of ladder fuels causing excess heat underneath them. So it's sometimes I know it's tough. We want to look at all the trees and think about our fire risk in the trees. A lot of times we've got to look down too and kind of start combining that reality of that structure of fuel that starts in the ground and works its way up into the trees.
Gotcha. And I do have an unrelated question to the tree thing, but I want to give a moment if anyone else has any comments or questions before I just carry on.
And just a reminder to put your C or your Q in the chat. Like Tyler did.
Yeah. Okay, and I'm not seeing any, so I'll go in with the next question. So looking at those maps that you showed and also looking at on my own screen maps of Flagstaff, I noticed that a lot of the new subdivisions have very winding road networks with lots of dead-end cul-de-sacs. And in comparison, the older traditional neighborhoods have very regular grid networks. In your mind, is the grid network superior for emergency vehicle access and resident evacuation?
I don't have enough knowledge to get into that in detail. I'm happy to try to figure out a way for us to follow up with you and the whole commission in general on that. Because I know street widths and street design is something that we're looking at. Part of the modeling that we're looking at as well is getting into some evacuation planning. So we can work with developers to better understand how we can make sure that first responders can get in while people are getting out. And I don't know, I hate to point the finger at Alex if she's still on the call, but if community development has any thoughts on that, I really have not spent a whole lot of time yet thinking about street design.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I do kind of ask this question because I'm also thinking about that conversation around street widths, which I think there's a lot of upsides to street widths, but I know that there were also fire concerns. But I've also read a little bit that indicates that so long as you're building on a regular grid network, you can alleviate a lot of those concerns about emergency vehicle access and evacuation, because a grid network is just functions much better than the current winding outlines that most new subdivisions have. So just curious if I thought that might be a way to sort of synthesize.
No, you're spot on. I think that's exactly the kind of stuff that we're looking into, that we want to better understand. And with the evacuation modeling that we can get our hands on now. Oh, Alex, nice. I see your hand going up.
Hi, I'm here.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I heard the whole question, Tyler, but just in general, there's a few things that we have to consider. One is that, and these are my personal opinions and separate from maybe what's happening with the last cap, but streets take up a lot of space. And so the price of the land that a street takes up has to be paid for somehow, and that tends to be by the lots and by the houses. So the less streets, the better. Grids are fantastic. I love grids. just because I love like squares and rectangles and 90-degree angles. But Flagstaff is really not set up well for that. And especially these areas that we're now seeing development have so much topography that grids just really don't make a lot of sense. So we're absolutely always looking at, and this is probably more engineering and traffic in, relation with fire, looking at secondary access and how we can not only get emergency vehicles into neighborhoods, but that we can get people quickly out of the way and get them somewhere safe out of those neighborhoods. So we are always looking for those connections to happen. I think the big push that planners typically want smaller streets can sometimes maybe not support a lot of these other things that we need in our communities. As you know, streets can make fantastic fire breaks. They're safe areas where we can, mount a defense if something happens. But if you start making those streets smaller and they're already windy and going up and down hills and, around washes and stuff, it just becomes really, really a complicated problem with so many different pros and cons to it. So,
Mhm.
so
And-
I've managed to not answer any question at all. So you're
Yeah,
welcome.
I won't follow up on this here because I don't want to take up too much more time. But I am curious to hear more about the topographical barriers to regular street networks, because I can think of a lot of other cities that have very difficult topographies, but still have regular street grids. So yeah, I'd be curious to hear more about that in a different meeting or offline. I did have a third question, but again, I'll pause if anyone else has something they want to hit. Any Caesar cues in the chat?
Nope.
Okay, I'll make this one fast. So you mentioned landscaping. So I notice a lot of the new developments are using sort of like rock beds. It's dry landscaping. It's like these large rock beds around the structure. Is that what you're talking about with regards to firewise landscaping?
It's we're thinking about how do we optimize, what we would like to recommend for new development, that balances, all the things that we need to be looking at from low water use to fire safety to, quality of life and desirable community, all those different things combined. What we are able to bring to the table through the fire service is some emerging research that shows as little flammable material as possible within 5 feet of your home is a great way to prevent fire spread to your home. And so how we then will have the community conversations to balance what does the community want? Do they want that as a rule for all new development? Do we want that as a recommendation? We haven't really gone there yet talking about this, but an example would be let's say we've got a neighborhood that's been evacuated and a grass fire starts from an ember from a fire a mile away. And that grass fire could go right up to a house and start that house on fire. If you have that fuel-free 5, it's going to go out before it touches your house. Same thing with a fence. You don't need to have, complete fire-resistant fence for your entire property, but anything within 5 feet of your home, then all the science shows that is a great way to prevent that fire spread to your structure. So we think about like if somebody says, well, I've got a planter, I want to keep a planter within 5 feet. And then I ask them, well, can you move it if you had to? If you had 30 minutes to evacuate, could you move that stuff and create a fuel-free 5? You may have some lawn chairs. Well, obviously you can move the lawn chair, or maybe you can't because they're just really heavy, or you're just not able to. So how we communicate some of that landscaping within that 5-foot zone, that where we kind of start the conversation is, if you really want to not worry about it and potentially qualify for something like that IBHS wildfire prepared home in the future, if that becomes something eligible to Arizona residents, that their standard is no flammable material within 5 feet. And they're starting to open the door to allowing mature trees, which I think is great. But right now that standard is, nothing flammable within 5 feet. So that's kind of our baseline of where we start the conversation. But then again, it's from there we kind of talk to the homeowner about what their desires are and what their interests are.
Gotcha. And it's very interesting to me that you mentioned the 5 feet, because in a lot of these new developments, you've got like 15 feet setbacks, and these large gravel, like 15 feet of gravel around the structure looks very barren. And I think it sours a lot of people on new development. They're like, oh, I don't like the look of that. And it's very curious, though, that you mentioned 5 feet, because one thing that comes to my mind is, well, just reduce the setback. So you don't have 15 feet, you've only got like 5 feet. But 5 feet is a lot smaller than a lot of our current setbacks. And I know that our setbacks are sort of up for debate as part of the code analysis project. Just a thought there. You don't have to.
Yeah, it's, I mean, you're right, it's challenging because I think, people, when we survey Flagstaff and they say what neighborhoods do they like the most, it's the ones that I feel like potentially have some pretty high fire danger. And so thinking about, how we potentially evolve our own perceptions on, what is desirable. And, it's tough because we're not trying to be like these messages of doom and gloom and, everything must be metal and concrete and no vegetation. It's like, no, we can absolutely have wonderful vegetation. We just have to be really smart about how we do it.
Gotcha. And thank you for your responses, and thank you everyone else for your patience.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Neil. That
Yep.
was great. Thank you so much for the information.
Yeah, thank you. And just one last plug, our City of Flagstaff Fire Department website has our contact info. We've got some of the documents that we share with the public on there that you can download, and you can schedule a wildfire risk assessment for your property by reaching out to us through that website.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and then anytime you guys have questions, or at some point soon, we'll hopefully come back and give you an update on some of that modeling.
We look forward to it. Thank you again.
Thank you for giving the time. Take care.
Okay, next up, we have informational items to and from commission members, staff, and future agenda item requests. First up, Sarah Dar, will you be providing the update for the Housing Authority Commission?
I am. Thank you so much, Sandy. With Moses not here today, I'm on my own. We can't tag team it. However, I think the most critical update is the transfer of the Williams voucher program to the city of Flagstaff. This is happening. HUD has been extra special to work with lately. The Phoenix office is trying. We did get approval in writing of the program transfer, but they failed to recognize any of the conditions that we had placed upon the transfer, such as a fully hold harmless, both programmatically and financially. I've received most now in writing of what we have asked for, what the conditions were approved by the Housing Authority Board and City Council. I have a draft of a letter in my inbox. I met with the regional HUD director and the Phoenix field office director on Monday. They have drafted a letter acknowledging the final things we needed. And so things are set to move on the 1st. Now, what's unusual with this one is that because their program has been without administration since September of 2023, really, is we have yet to be provided with a list of current voucher holders and landlords. And so official notification has not gone to them because we don't yet know who they are. And so that will be in process within the first couple weeks of July. If any of you encounter folks who have a voucher from Williams that will soon be administered by Flagstaff, please reassure them that they don't have to move. Things are stable. They can stay where they are. And we will be going through and meeting with each and every household as time allows us to. And so we're super excited to bring these additional vouchers into our community. With saying this as well, I know some of you are familiar with the Emergency Housing Voucher Program named EHV. The emergency housing vouchers were created during the last presidential administration, targeted to households that were homeless, facing homelessness, fleeing, dating, domestic violence, or human trafficking. These vouchers were available to households through referrals with a continuum of care, not via the waiting list. The special conditions surrounding these vouchers, and we were granted 27 of them. The special conditions were that they could not be reissued to a different household after September of 2024. No, September 2023. And so we're down to 24 of these vouchers, and the current presidential administration discontinued funding for these vouchers on an ongoing basis, with funding terminating at the end of 2026. HUD published a waiver at the end of last week, or published a notice that lets us request a formal waiver to allow these households to apply to the Section 8 waiting list and apply a local preference for them if we go through a process, including public notice of the change of local preference, etc. And so we will be undertaking that process late summer, early fall, has to be approved by the Housing Authority Board, etc. But that would allow our current EHV voucher holders to apply to the Section 8 waiting list, have the local preference applied to them. So as a voucher becomes available, they are able to remain stably housed on an ongoing basis. We will, of course, be pursuing this waiver. And I think one of the more helpful things as well is we have a number of new vouchers coming into our community Tuesday. And so we will have some voucher availability. We're currently a little bit over leased. Leasing's hard. People come on and fall off at different rates. Right now we're at 105% utilization. That will come down. There's already a couple households we know are surrendering their vouchers. So this will help. And it will help our community, especially directly by making vouchers available for those that were poised to lose housing assistance at the end of 2026. And so that's a little bit more of a technical update than I usually give, but there are a number of practitioners on here that I felt may be interested in that information as we're like, how do we manage our way out of this one? So good news on both fronts. Housing Authority Board at their last meeting approved the amendments necessary to the Section 8 administrative plan to extend our service area to Williams, apply local preference to Williams residents. It's not the entire zip code. It's only city limit boundaries, and then make those changes throughout the administrative plan. So we're ready to go on the administrative side, but there's going to be a whole lot of figuring out where things are and who the folks are once we have access to the files. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Questions for Sarah? All right, seeing none. Thank you so much and enjoy the lake house.
Thank you. Thank you.
Up next is updates from housing commissioners. Are there any housing commissioners that have updates they'd like to share? Commissioner Denham.
Hey, just kind of a small thing I wanted to note. So I had been sending the video on the housing plan update to a few people, and I got some feedback from a couple just wanting to have more detail around it. Some examples that were given to me is like the section that talks about the number of residents impacted. There's a lot of interest in what is meant by impact. Like, is that just being assisted by city funds or enrolling in a city program or qualifying for income restricted unit? And then a lot of questions about kind of the geography and distribution around where housing is being built, both affordable and market rate. And I myself am pretty interested in some of those questions. And even though I feel like I'm fairly sophisticated and dig around the city website, I know it's hard to find some of that stuff. So If there are places to answer those kinds of questions that I could pass on to people in the community as I'm talking to them, I would find that really helpful. Just wanted to put that bug out there.
Thank you. I see Adriana taking fast and furious notes. Any other commissioner updates or questions? Okay, with that, it's updates from our city staff, and I'll give it to you, Adriana.
I just wanted to make sure to ask Commissioner Denham to put that in writing for me. That would be very helpful, Commissioner Denham, and then I can respond to that, and you can feel free to share the information like glitter.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Adriana, I'm giving it back to you for staff updates, but I also noticed that Christine Pavlik has her hand raised, so I'm not sure which we should go to first.
We could go to Christine because I don't have any actually. So
Okay, Christine, please.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to give a quick update about our community development block grant program. We went to City Council early this month with some finalized recommendations. We were very pleased to find that we were allocated funding about $60,000 more than we had anticipated and more than we received last year. We were one of the only cities to go up in our allocation. I wish I could take credit for that, but again, that formula they use is not based on anything other than city demographics and whatever HUD throws into it, but we will take it. So we ended up being able to fund an additional public service project. So I'll just give you a quick rundown. We awarded about $19,000 to community assistance teams of Flagstaff for their mobile shower program outreach to homeless individuals. We awarded about $45,000 to Homeless Youth Connection for youth coaches, for youth experiencing homelessness working to finish their high school diploma, and then $55,000 to Northland Family Help Center for them to hire a case manager for their youth shelter. Then we awarded $280,000 to Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona. They are going to acquire 2 additional units to use as permanent affordable rentals for our community. And lastly, we'll use the remaining about $200,000 for playground updates in target neighborhoods. So we're going to focus on Brandon Homes in the Pine Knoll neighborhood. And so that is considered a target neighborhood project that will benefit both the Brandon Homes residents as well as the Pine Knoll neighborhood and Southside neighborhoods as a whole. So we will see those projects and programs come to fruition this fall. And other than that, we will be working this fall on our consolidated plan, which is our 5-year strategic plan for CDBG funds. And so you'll be hearing from us a lot about that in the coming months. And that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Questions for Christine? All right. Any other city staff updates? Seeing none, that is the last item on our agenda. So thank you all for attending. Thank goodness we made quorum. So thank you all for being here and staying. And with that, we can adjourn the meeting at 2:09.
thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.